What's up, everybody? Shane here from Saber Bay with another video, doing something that I have not done before, so I hope I don't mess it up too bad. Today we're going to be doing a install, call it a tutorial, walkthrough of the Gianobi hilt, and I'm going to be giving some tips and tricks, hopefully to help you with your installs for this, not just this specific hilt, but maybe this things that you can incorporate into other installs down the road. So laid before here, I have the hilt and all the parts and chassis parts required to do this install video. I will go over each thing individually, and I will talk about each piece for those who are newer to installs and are trying to learn some basic instruction for how to wire certain things. So this video could be for all skill levels, although if you are a more experienced installer, this video probably isn't for you. And all I do ask is that if you do have questions or comments or things that you maybe disagree with in this video, please just don't take it as scripture or the best way to do everything. These are just going to be things that I do, things that work for me in my installs. So your mileage may vary, but hopefully this helps someone a little bit. So the Gianobi hilt, which is going to be the focal point of this video and install. This is a new release coming. It's still, as of this video, in pre-order stage. Designed by Laredo Sabers, our buddy Gustavo. And it is going to be coming exclusively to Saber Bay soon. The production run should be finished here very shortly. Still waiting on that. It's been delayed a little bit. And so this is the pre-production prototype, essentially. And the chassis design, I sent the hilt off to have a chassis made by Jimmy Saber Junk. And it's a 2-part chassis. It's pretty simple. And I believe this install is very install friendly. So that is what prompted me to make this video. I had been deciding for a while to figure out what is a good hilt to do this sort of thing on, and I think this is a good candidate. So the one I have here, it is installed, and basically I'm going to be showing you how to transform all of this into this. And before we get going here, I'll show you also what the finished product should look like. Although if it doesn't look exactly like this, don't worry, because we all start somewhere. So this is the bottom half, and this battery also has a custom wrap on it. So that is what is different from this battery. Very simple, it's compact, it's got a kill switch, so we're going to go ahead and switch that off. But if yours doesn't look exactly like this, it's not to worry. The important part when you're doing an install is to take your time, not rush things. And as long as you wire things correctly and follow your manuals, it should be okay. I'm going to show you guys the top half of this, how it looks when it's in the hilt. If I can get it out here. There we go. And again, this top half is compact. It's nice and clean. Got the pin side of the rotary chassis PCB here, 2 tactile switches, and your NeoPixel connector. So we'll get to all of that here in just a sec. And the way that it goes in, these 2 actuators right here, they go up from underneath the inside of the hilt. And they have a channel right here that holds them in place. So when you put these in, you want to make sure, if you don't have something underneath these will just sort of fall out. They'll bottom out here. They don't have anything holding them down, which is why this chassis is required for this. so that when you go to put it together, ideally you want to leave this in. And let me see if I can get that lined up here. There we go. Okay. So for now, we're going to set all this to the side. We're going to start getting into the install portion. The video may have some cuts and clips as I probably edit some of these parts out. Trying not to ramble on, but I do have a habit of doing that, so I apologize. I'm much better at doing the installing without having to talk my way through it. So thank you guys for bearing with me on some of these parts, but I'll try and filter out some of the gibberish. Okay, so when you're going to start your install, it's a good idea. Basically, if you're not going to write things down, you don't have to map out and draw a diagram every single time. For newer builders, it is a good idea. Trying basically to get familiar with all your components, plan out your wiring diagram, how you're going to run things, and instead of figuring things out as you go and maybe accidentally having to redo something or rewire something a different way, the goal here is think about the steps that you're going to take. Now, I will basically tell you the steps that I would take in this situation. So for this particular build, if you just kind of follow the steps that I give for this, then it should work out just fine. So first things first, talking about the parts themselves. So outside of the chassis parts, starting with the main component, the soundboard. This is the Profi. This one is pre-programmed. Examples of this board are at the website. I sell these pre-programmed for NeoPixel 2 button setups. So perfect for this build. If you get these from me, you can literally just wire it up and it's good to go. And these are all tested prior to shipping out. You have a speaker. This is a 28mm speaker. Lots of different versions of speakers out there. 28mm would be the most common size, and typically on the back you'll see some of the spec ratings on here, and that is 4 ohm and 3 watt. Other speakers may have 8 ohm, 3 watt, or some different numbers, but I would say this is a fairly common one as well. And this is a X-Bass speaker also that is sold here at Saber Bay. In fact, all these parts are sold at Saber Bay, but you can get them a lot of other places as well. Your battery. This is a Keypower 18650 battery. It's a protected cell. Protected cells are, in my opinion, the only types of cells that you should be using in Sabers, although there are some vendors who are selling them unprotected, which is, I don't want to say okay, but if that is the only option available to you, then it is what it is. To me, the Keypowers and similar brands that are protected are sort of the gold standard of NeoPixel Sabers. You can buy this one, has 3000 milliamps. That's what this rating is right here, milliamps. Always want to get one that has at least 10 amps of discharge current. This one has 15. And there's also a version that has 3120 milliamps as well. And there are some other batteries that will say they have more, but really they probably don't. So this is about what you would expect to get from this kind of battery. So again, this is a 18650 removable battery, protected cell, and a button top. And you can tell it's a button top because it will have this little button on the positive end. So plus means positive, minus means negative. That's what the negative side looks like. It's flat and a button top. Next we have a kill switch. This is a high amp kill switch. This is what you're going to use. These are technically optional parts of a build, but if there is space for a kill switch, I always recommend putting one in, and they're pretty easy to wire. You've got three legs here. Grab a little pointer tool, or outer legs here. You're only going to use one of these, and your outer leg is going to be wired to the battery negative directly. This middle leg will always return to the soundboard. And I always wire my negatives to these. Some people may say wire the positive. I think that's their preference, and they'll say it doesn't matter, but I think it does. So I am always going to wire my battery negative to one of these outside legs, and then another negative wire to return to the soundboard negative. So that is basically how a kill switch works. Flips back and forth, useful for cutting power if you're going to remove batteries or things like that. Just a good idea to have one. And next up, these two parts right here are the rotary chassis PCB sets. Now, these are going to be used for chassis like these. This is not a fully removable chassis, so we'll say about half or partially removable. Since this will stay in the hilt, you can see these two holes right here. These are going to be where these would go, and they make contact inside the hilt like that. And each of these sets has 6 traces. So you can see each of these rings represents a trace. And if you flip it on the other side, we'll take a look at the different types of pads that you can use for these rotary chassis PCBs. So each of these, and it will match up for the one that has the pins on it, has spots for up to 2 switches. So you'll have a positive, 2 positive pads, which would be for your NeoPixel positives, ideally. You have 2 negative pads marked by a negative symbol here and here. These are going to be for your NeoPixel negative pads. B1 ideally is going to be for your main switch. B2 ideally for your secondary auxiliary switch. Common ground, which is typically what your switches will both need, and they can share that pad together. Your data line right here, which is your NeoPixel data. And this spot that is marked with the ID is for an SMD resistor for blade detect. Now we're not going to use that for this video. I typically don't use that, but you can. If you need to know how to do that, just refer to the manual on Stock Custom Works' page for how to use this little feature right here. But it's not required, so we're going to leave it alone. And this is the same, ideally the same setup, except this is the side that holds the pins. So the pins are not soldered to this yet. I will solder those later when we get to that part. And this part right here is actually going to go into the upper half of the chassis. So moving on to the next parts. The NeoPixel V3 hilt side connector. This is going to be what connects to your NeoPixel blade. So there are 10 pins, and they are arranged in a way that if you draw circles around all of these, you have 3 traces. Grab a blade side PCB to show you. So if I were to stack this directly on top of that, it will line up with these. And that is why this is oriented this way. Now the other cool thing about these is the onboard LEDs. If you saw on the hilt over here, just grab that real quick. It will light up to match the color of the blade. Now there are different wirings and ways to wire these up, but I'm not going to dive into that now. But when you put this in, obviously I need to flip the kill switch.
I have seen that it is stand in the way of peace.
So you can see the LEDs are built in to the top. So these are probably considered another gold standard of the Sabre community. There are other vendors who make these. I've been selling Stock Custom Works for a long time. He's definitely one of the pioneers of the industry. Can't go wrong using these. There are other vendors who sell their own versions, but this is the recommended one. Now, when we get down to installing, you will typically need to sand some of the edges here, and we'll sand this down quite a bit to get this fit into this holder. And the wiring is pretty simple. We're not going to change anything with how it's set up with the resistors. We're not going to get into that. We're just going to use it as is. Now these little things, these are going to come with the chassis specifically for the Gianobi. This is just one of many versions of a tactile switch. And a tactile switch typically looks not quite like this. There are other versions of tactile switches, but the concept is the same. So tactile switches are considered momentary switches. When you press down, they're going to momentarily make a connection between the switch, main switch wire, and the ground. Now how we're going to wire these up, and I'll briefly touch on this now, but when we actually go to wire these up, I'll explain further. You have 2 legs on each side, and if you look at it from this view, one wire goes here and one wire goes here. That's not the only way you can do it, but that is the easiest way to do it. And there are 2 of those for this build. The battery contacts, there are 2. Every removable battery setup will have 2 battery contacts. They don't all look like this. These are larger. We call these the spring-loaded battery contacts because of the spring. Your spring side is always going to be your negative, ideally. And this flat part right here, the flatter end, is for your positive. So if you can imagine it in the hilt, the flat part here goes up against the spring, presses in like that, and the button top will press up against the positive. And when you receive some of these battery contacts, for example, if you get them received with this chassis, first things you want to do is cut off this part right here. This is how they come, but you don't use them. So you can use whatever you need to cut, little wire snips. Just cut that section off. So that is one tiny little bit of prep work you can do. Okay, so we've gone over just about all the parts. Next, let's talk about what you're going to need for this build. So aside from the parts, a couple things you will need. Number 1, soldering iron. I'm using a Hakko soldering iron, spelled H-A-K-K-O. The model number is FX-888D as in Delta. It's very reliable. I wouldn't say it's a high end. It is a little pricey. I think they're about $90 to $100, maybe more on Amazon. There are plenty of other cheaper ones you can get. But this one I've had for a while. It's been reliable, and I don't think it'll go out anytime soon. Other things that you will need are some solder. This is a specific brand that I use. I've been using it for about 5 years now. And compared to anything else I've used, and I haven't used a lot, but I have not had a reason to switch away from this. This is a very good brand. Some flux. Flux is important. You're going to need some wire snips, ranging ideally from 22 at least to 30, because that is the range that we will be using today. Wire cutters, any kind of wire cutters, but ideally something small just to make small cuts. A pair of tweezers really comes in handy for grabbing things that you might not be able to reach with your fingers, especially short little stubby fingers like mine. Something to grip some wires as well. I use a little set of pliers. They have been worn down a little bit, so they're not as harsh grabbing the wire. And it also will depend on what kind of wire you have, if that is a good idea or not. But for the type of wire that I use, it is fairly durable, so I don't worry about that. Some helping hands. I've got a setup here that has quite a few, but I'm just going to be using one. So helping hands for grabbing the board. Now this will be something that I will personally recommend you put some kind of shrink wrap on these, depending on how strong and I guess sharp your helping hands are. Mine are worn down and they're not very strong, and I put them on specific spots of the component so they don't damage anything. But you can definitely make an argument that you should always heat shrink those, and I won't argue with that. But for this video, I'm not going to do that just because I never do. And then lastly, you'll need lots of different wire. And I'm not going to show all the wire, but this is one example. PTFE stranded wire. This is high temp wire, and it's from PowerWorks. But there's about 8 or 9 different types of wire that we're going to be using. Okay, so let's just kind of jump right into everything. So I'm going to do a couple of prep steps here. So what I always like to do when I start is I know I'm going to take off a little bit on the sides of the board here, just to get some of that extra, whatever you call it, circuit board off. Because I know that when I'm going to slide this into the chassis, I don't want it to get caught on anything. So this chassis is going to have a board retention method here, that when we're all done wiring things up, it will slide into place. So that is, again, why I say it's a good idea just to have this cleaned up. And then next, what I'm going to do, I'm going to take my battery, I'm going to go ahead and throw it on my charger, so I make sure that it has some juice when I'm ready to go. And to start, we're going to put the top half sort of to the side. We're not going to worry about that. And we're going to take the components that we do need for now. We don't need the switches. We don't need the NeoPixel connector. And we don't need the soundboard yet. We're going to basically be starting all of our wire management first. And we're going to be working around this section right here, kill switch, speaker, this negative side, kind of work our way that way. Okay, so first thing I like to do, I'm going to plan my wires. So if I have the board sitting this way, and if you know your pad layouts on the board, I'm going to kind of start with my bigger wires here in the kill switch. So we're going to have 2 different wires that we're going to use. Let me pull those out here. So we're going to use size 22 for negatives, 1 white and 1 black. The white one, we're going to use this to identify the negative that's going to return from the middle leg of the kill switch to the soundboard. So if I'm measuring this out, you can use your chassis as a measuring tool, and always leave a little bit of extra room. Make this too long rather than too short. You can always cut wire, but you can't make it longer. So what I'm actually going to do pretty much for the entirety of this video is I'm going to over exaggerate how much wire I probably actually need. But I'm going to cut 2 wires. And I'm going to try and keep this wire out of the way. I would like to say that I keep my desk extremely clean while I work, but I don't always do that. I'm just kind of going as fast as I can. I am not a super fast installer, so this will not be the quickest install. Okay, so back to figuring out how I'm going to run my wires. For this chassis, there are basically two main wire channels. There's one right here, and there's one right here. And you will need to figure out which wires you should put on each side, because what you don't want, or you'd like to try and avoid, is having wires cross over. If a wire is coming from this way and it has to get wired to this side of the board, you don't want things to have to cross this open section. It just keeps things a lot neater and cleaner if you plan that part ahead, so that when you put all of your components together and you slide the board in, you won't see a bunch of jumbled mess down here. So what that means, if I start with my battery, not your battery, your soundboard negative, if I have it laying like this, the soundboard negative is on this side. So I know that I want the white wire to pass through this channel. So I'm going to pass it through here. And we're just going to pull this up. And also, I recommend you get some strong tweezers. They aren't going to let you down like that. Okay, so you can pull this through to about there. It won't go anywhere, it should stay in place. And now we can take this wire, we're going to pass it through this hole right here, which holds the kill switch. There we go. Got it. Okay, so that is the first one. We're going to leave it like that. So before we start really soldering everything together, there's going to be some wires sticking out in a couple of places, and that's okay because we're just kind of prepping things. Okay, next wire, black 22. This is going to go to the negative battery contact. So another thing to look out for is when you have two cutouts for your battery contacts, which one is for the positive and which one is for the negative? Well, I can't speak for other chassis, but usually there will be a strong indicator. If you look at this section right here and this section right here, notice how this side right here is a little bit longer than this. And that's because this extra length is accounting for the springs, especially when they're compressed. And this one is shorter because you only have a short amount to account for with the battery contact. So in this case, this right here is your positive and this is your negative. So just remember that when we're figuring out where to run our wires. So we're going to pass this battery negative wire. We're going to go on this side, opposite side, because we don't want to bunch up everything to one side. So we're going to see that wire. Oops. So that wire should show up right there. This is why you need stuff like tweezers to be able to grab things and pull it towards you. Okay, and then we're going to go and pull this wire through a little bit more, give us some more slack, and then following the same step that we did with the white wire, I'm going to pass this through the hole that has the kill switch. Okay. Go ahead and pull that through a little bit more because we obviously don't need that much sticking out. And pull. Oops. See what I did there? I pulled on it too much. We're going to do this over just one more time. And honestly, I'll probably cut this part out of the video.